Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de unplandivino.net. Vamos a seguir con Clau, con uno de los más importantes que hemos hecho hasta ahora, ¿verdad? Parecía que no, pero, o sea, puede parecer que no, no sé qué título le vamos a poner. Aún no he subido la primera versión cuando grabamos esta, que diga la primera parte. ¿Qué tal, Claudia, desde Argentina? Allí en otoño, nosotros en otoño y allí en primavera.
Primavera, sí. Celebrando, la verdad que es como decías al principio, Iván, uno de los más importantes, y ayer hablando con Ana Pilar, que también está en el mini grupo, le decía, parecía que algo que ya lo habíamos escuchado, que ya lo venimos hablando, que ya lo desandamos, entre comillas, pero sin embargo resultó sumamente refrescante y maravilloso. Así que sí, muy agradecida por eso, Iván. Gracias.
Gracias por permitirlo y que la energía de compartirlo, pues ya vamos viendo que es otra y nos ayuda, pues, a ver las heridas de otra manera y todo eso. Luego vamos a comentar después de esto y bueno, pues vamos a ver la siguiente parte y la parte que hacen la oración entera, la repasan, que es también muy bonita. Eso dura como 1 hora y la haremos en otro siguiente, no sé si hoy u otro día. Y vamos con una más breve. Bueno, y para completar el tema de la fe. Vamos allá. Tú me dices si eso oye igual de fuerte.
Well, we just had a break, and Mary needed to have a cry, so she's gone and done that, which is great.
Sí, sí.
And we'll get started.
Se oye igual de bien a él, ¿no? Y todo.
Sí, súper.
Again, on this issue of faith, because it's the issue of faith that we wanted to discuss a fair bit about. And the understanding, having a good understanding about what faith is and how we can develop faith is an essential part of developing our relationship with God. So what I wanted to perhaps begin with this issue of faith is how our concept of God will determine, and it's not our intellectual concept of God, but rather our emotional concept of God, that is going to determine how much faith we have to actually develop a longing or a desire to receive God's love. Mm-hmm. So the problem that we face is this. At the beginning, we have no faith in God. We have no concept that God has love to give. We have no concept that God even exists most of the time. We have no personal feeling that God exists sometimes. We might have a personal feeling God exists, but we've got no idea how to connect with God generally, even if we do have a feeling that God exists. We might have a whole heap of false beliefs about God, a whole heap of false beliefs about love, a whole heap of false beliefs about what is truthful or what is the best thing to do, a whole heap of false beliefs about humility. And these, of course, are going to colour what we do with faith. So rather than trying to individually get rid of every one of those things that I've just mentioned, you know, our false concept of God, our false concept of faith, our false concept of ourselves, our false concept of truth, and all of the untruths that we've imbibed over our life, we can actually put all of that aside for a moment and we can focus primarily on developing faith. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a few key things we need to have faith about, and they all involve God. You are not going to have a longing for God when you don't have any kind of even intellectual concept of God that is in harmony with the truth about God. So, for example, if I give some examples, if I don't have the faith that God is merciful and gracious and does not have anger, then I will believe probably that God would be more like my parent, like my father perhaps, who was angry at times and often was not merciful and often was not gracious with me as a child. Now, while I hold on to those particular concepts about, I don't have to release those concepts about my father, my earthly father. But I do have to see logically that God can't be that person before I'll develop any longing to actually want God's love in my life. So in other words, while I'm holding on to this concept that God is just a wrathful and punishing God, just like my daddy was, I'm actually going to not have a desire, a longing to receive God's love in my soul while I'm holding on to that concept. I've got to give up this concept inside of myself somehow.
So when you say give it up, do I have to, what does that mean?
Well, and you can ask as many other questions you want in it as well, darling. And when I say give it up, I don't have to give it up the concept about my father, that he was wrathful and that he was sometimes ungracious and he was sometimes unmerciful with me. What I need to do is give up the concept that God's the same as my father in order to actually have a sincere longing for God's love to enter. I need to at least see the potentiality logically that God is not the same as my father.
So I'm opening myself to possibilities initially.
Exactly. I'm humble enough to open myself to the new concept. About God that I didn't have before, you see. And unfortunately, with a lot of the holy books of the Bible, the Quran and the Bible, most of the holy books on earth, they explain the concept of a wrathful God too. So I'm actually going to have to confront my belief in the Bible and my belief in the Quran to do this. Because I'm going to have to see at some point that no, God is only a God of love. Why would I want love from somebody who's not loving? If I believe God is not loving and God's a God of wrath and potentially destroys people, and in the Bible and the Quran there are examples of God doing that without there even really being a good reason. And that, of course, causes me to have a lot of fear about God rather than desire for God.
Yeah.
And, of course, there is a Christian concept that I must have a fear of God. In fact, I just answered last week an email from a chap who said that I should fear God. And I'm saying, no, I don't fear God. I don't fear God at all. Why would I ever fear God? God's a God of love. I don't need to fear anybody who really loves me, ever. So these concepts will need to be at least challenged in my mind before I will engage a process of longing for love from the being who I believed was all of these things. That are untrue. And if I let myself feel, no, God is a God of love. No, God doesn't want to punish me every time I make a mistake. God knows that God's laws sort out all of that. God just feels compassion for me when I make a mistake. Like, God's merciful. So when I am repentant, mercy comes from God. Right? These are all principles I need to start to understand. And this is why I constructed what is called the Lord's Prayer, that has been vastly modified in the Bible. But the real Lord's Prayer, I constructed it in such a way to actually expose in the individual their false concept of themselves and God.
And so what you're describing here is the beginning of faith, or this is what faith is initially. It's opening
just a logical intellectual concept.
A logical intellectual concept, and I also heard you mention we're opening our heart based on that concept.
We're deciding to take the risk of our heart based on logic, based on the fact that we have a logical intellectual concept of God, which is different to our own emotional concept of God, and also different to our own emotional concept of our current human parents. So what we're doing is we're saying, right, I realise inside of me, I do believe all these bad things about God. Right? I believe that God's going, that God's, I'm angry with God, and I'm upset about this, and I'm upset about all these different things. And I need to understand that this is in my soul. I do need to. And I need to allow the expression of these particular things that are in my soul. If they're ever going to be released, I need to have the humility to release them. However, I need to also hold on, at least initially, intellectually, to the concept that God is different to the person I feel God to be. And I feel God is wrathful, and sometimes I might even want God to be wrathful. There's a lot of people on the planet who want God to be wrathful. They want God to come and punish everybody else other than them. So they want God to be wrathful. And I'm going to have to, at some point, give up that concept if I really want to continue receiving divine love from God. To receive divine love from God, I have to have a belief that is at least in harmony with the love being received. And if my belief is that God's not a God of love, then I can't have a longing for God's love. If my belief is that God's going to be punishing to me, then I can't receive divine love under those circumstances, because my concept that I'm holding on to with my will is in direct disharmony with the love itself from entering me. So
one of the things on that point that I had written down here was that faith is believing a right viewpoint of God.
Exactly.
It's having a belief or exercising our desire even to believe the truth about God, which is good things about God, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. We must exercise our intellect at least to see the logic and to see the truth that God exists in the manner that we are not accustomed to, but in a new manner. God is different to the person we believe God to be. We need to understand that. And if we don't ever understand it, and we're not even willing to intellectually see the difference, then we're never going to open our heart to the difference. So to give an example, we get a lot of Orthodox Christians emailing us, condemning me and condemning all of the teachings that I'm teaching, and stating to me categorically over and over again that God is a God of wrath. He's going to punish the wicked and he's going to punish me. Right? Now, of course, I don't believe that, because I have a relationship with God and I know God's never going to punish me for my actions taken that are in harmony with love. So God is never going to punish me for that. And God's not going to punish me for mistakes I make unless the mistakes are out of harmony with love. Then the laws of God correct me. And I don't even see that as a punishment. I just see it as correction, where God's correcting me from my mistakes. I don't see that God's punishing God under those circumstances. I see that God's just providing me correction here, providing me correction there. And if I'm willing to accept the correction, then I'll have a completely different experience with God. But they're telling me that God's going to punish me and destroy me, and I've got to repent, and if I don't repent, and then they tell me all the beliefs I should accept about God, which are all about God being a God of wrath. In fact, the whole idea that God's going to destroy me for making a mistake is all about a God of wrath. Now, this is why they can't receive love. Because they have a false belief about God in that moment. And in that moment, they're not acting in harmony with love. Because if they acted in harmony with love, they wouldn't act in harmony with this false belief. They'd realise the truth. Hang on a sec. What I'm telling Jesus is that he's going to be destroyed And of course, they don't believe I'm Jesus. They believe I'm Alan John Miller and a usurper. But they're telling Alan John Miller that he's going to be destroyed for being loving and telling the truth and preaching concepts of love. That, in fact, one Christian this week told me that every single time I talk about love, it's pointless because I'm not Jesus. And I claim that I am. And because I'm claiming that I am, all of the other works that I do are pointless. And that's what he told me. And I'm going, yeah, you don't understand God at all. Because everything is about love for God. My desire to share about love is about love. My motivations are loving. So you don't know, I'm not afraid of God under those circumstances. Why would I ever be afraid of God? If God's a God of love and all God does is ever correct me, all I do is wait for correction. And this is not the correction that I need to take because he's telling me that God's not a God of love. He's telling me God's somebody else that I know God isn't. Now, while that man who did that accepts God as being a wrathful God and accepts that God's going to destroy the wicked at some point in the future, which is not true, and it's never going to be true, that man prevents himself from receiving more love. His belief is out of harmony with the person who's giving the love. And as such, the love can't flow. So he needs to have some faith. He needs to give up his beliefs in the Bible being God's word on this matter. And he needs to accept that, no, God's not a God of wrath. God's not a God who's going to just punish us for every mistake we make. God is not vindictive. God's not going to torment me in hell. God's not going to place me in hell so that Satan can torment me either, by the way. Right? God is a God of love. And if I go to God with that underlying feeling in my soul, now I've got the ability to receive some of that love. And this is where we must have faith that God is different to the person that we've been taught God is.
And if we take an example, say, from Joanne Blogs, you've given an example there of where someone believes in a very angry, punishing God, and that's actually not basing their faith in anything truthful.
Exactly.
A lot of other people might feel that God say that they believe, no, God is loving.
They say God's loving, and they say they believe God's loving.
Yeah, but they feel they themselves are not good enough yet.
They're not lovable.
They're not lovable. Yeah. Now, what I find interesting about that belief, which is, I'm bringing this example because
something you felt yourself.
Something that I felt myself. Yeah. Is that we're basing our faith on the fact that we believe God is loving. It's just I'm the problem. Which actually turns into a reflection onto God, doesn't it?
Totally.
It's saying that God only loves perfect people or worthy people.
Exactly. Or people that don't make mistakes.
So it turns into a faith that is based on untruth about God.
Well, it's an untruth about love too. Yeah. That love can't be given to anybody who's not perfect. That's the belief, really, that you've got to try to be perfect and then you'll get love. And I can understand why people have that, because that's the belief they have with their daddies and mummies, right? That was the condition under which they received love when they were growing up. But that's not the condition under which we receive love from God.
And it's actually, so then it actually prevents us acting in faith, asking for love, because we're actually trying to make ourselves perfect before we ask for the love.
If I have a belief in my heart that I have to be perfect before God will love me, then I'm not going to desire God's love when I'm not perfect. That's the sad thing about it. But it's when we're not perfect that we need more of God's love.
And where we end up in this self-reliant thing we talked about earlier, where we're trying to fix ourselves and before we even ask, even act in faith.
And remember, we've said right at the beginning of this conversation, that fixing ourselves is a long, drawn-out, natural love process. And allowing God's love to transform our soul is a short thing that deals with the causes. So while I'm exercising my will by saying, well, no, I've got to be perfect and not make mistakes before God's going to love me, I am actually on the natural love path. Even though I might believe in all of the concepts of divine truth, I might believe that God is love, and I might believe that because God's love, all of these different things are true, and all those kind of beliefs that are basically just intellectual. At this point in my head, they're not in my heart, because I haven't received the divine love to know them in my heart. And because of all of that, I'm just still on the natural love path. I'm still engaging this process where I believe I have to rely on myself to get into a condition before God's going to love me. No. If you truly understood God's love, you'd understand that God already loves you right now, no matter how dark and evil and whatever it is else that you've done in your life. No matter how bad everyone else thinks you are, God loves you. And God's waiting to give you this love, but is reliant on your just opening your soul to receive it. And while you hold on to this concept that you're not good enough, you can't receive it. Because that's not God's concept of you. God's to receive divine love, I have to be in harmony with the truth of God's concept of me. So
do I? But and you just that last
even intellectually,
statement you said. That's what I was going to say.
Exactly.
Because I've heard that statement initially, and I thought, okay, I have to get into harmony with how God feels about me. Emotionally, I have to do that before I'll receive the love. But that's skipping over faith, isn't it?
It is skipping over. Faith, but also it is true that you will have to release some emotions in order to have a sincere desire to ask for love when you feel bad about yourself. So my suggestion to a person who feels bad about themselves is, feel bad about yourself, have a good cry about how bad you are, but understand with your mind at least that God will still give you love even though you're bad, if you ask for it.
And I suppose my experience is that if I act in faith and ask for the love, then all of the feelings that I have that I don't deserve it, or that I'm not worth it, or I'm not perfect enough yet to receive it, they actually come up more profoundly and intensely than if I just try to feel it on my own and get up the courage to act in faith and ask God for love.
Yes.
So it seems like using our will to in faith seems to...
Even what you said, like get up the courage to ask for God's love.
Yeah,
that is a blasphemy towards God.
Yeah.
In a way, because it's a belief about God that says that we need to be afraid of God somehow. So it itself is a statement of an error that exists in the soul, and that needs to be released. Now, when you receive some of the love from God, you realise there was no risk. There was no risk.
That's right. For me, the most scary thing would be to ask for love and not receive it. because I would view that as something about myself. But that's actually skipping over the truth that God always is going to love me if I ask for it sincerely, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you think you're asking for it and you don't receive it, right?
Yeah.
Which is a possibility.
Sure.
A lot of people do that.
Right.
They think and they don't receive it. And then the emotion comes up, I'm not worthy to receive it. Understand that while that's an emotion you need to feel, that it's not the truth from God's perspective. God feels that the way God feels is, if you ask me for love, I'm going to give you some. That's how God feels, right? I have to wait till you ask because you have to exercise your will, right? And I can't give it to you when you haven't exercised your will, because that would be forcing you, and I don't want to force you. My love will never force you. But if you ask, I will always give it. That's the underlying belief, right?
So you're really saying there's two categories of people. People who I think they're asking and not receiving.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people where, you know, I don't even ask.
They're not even asking.
Because I just feel like I'm not going to get it.
Exactly.
Because I'm already judging myself so much.
And of course you can't get it under those circumstances because you're not asking.
Exactly.
That's the only reason why. It's not because you're bad.
So
you're not asking.
It's sort of like two camps who don't receive God's love, is the ones who never actually ask, and the ones who tell themselves they're asking, but they're arrogant and proud, and they've got a heap of blockages which are out of harmony with love that cause them to not receive. Yeah.
So there are, if we analyse why people don't receive divine love, both of those are the reasons. They're the only two reasons, in fact, why we don't receive divine love. One is because we have a feeling inside of us that we won't ask. That's one reason why. And the other reason why is because we think we're asking and we're just being arrogant, and we've got heaps of blocks that we're not being open to. That's the only other reason why we would not receive divine love when we ask. So which one is it? That's the question we need to ask ourselves when we ask for divine love, or we think we're asking for divine love and not receiving it.
Stop for a second again.
Aquí ha dicho con la voz cortada María que tiene que cortar de nuevo. Pausar.
Yeah. And I just feel that there's still.
Y esto lo vamos a, no estaba en la transcripción, lo vamos a ir viendo. Ahora son menos de un minuto, creo que habla él solo. Siento, dice que todavía
Quite a lot of misunderstanding about how the love transforms the soul.
Hay muchas incomprensiones sobre cómo el amor de Dios transforma el alma. Que claro, ha sido toda la primera hora que vimos ayer, ¿verdad? De sensibilizarnos con la importancia del amor divino. Y entonces él pues aprovecha para hacer un poco ese repaso. Bueno, vamos así a ver cómo dice.
And that's why we brought up this message today.
Y es por eso que tratamos este mensaje hoy.
Because we want to get across the concept that the importance of developing faith in God.
O sea, queremos ir a fondo ahí en el concepto de la importancia de
the importance of developing faith in God.
Desarrollar la fe en Dios.
That God's nature is good.
Que la naturaleza de Dios es buena.
That God doesn't, that at least even here I have the concept. God's nature is.
Al menos tiene que estar el concepto ahí en la cabeza.
Good. God's nature is good. God's nature is good.
La naturaleza de Dios es buena, etc. O sea, repitiendo.
And then if I have an emotion which says, I hate you.
Entonces si tengo luego una emoción que dice.
God didn't feel that. Go and feel that. I hate you.
Como que dice, a ver qué dice.
And then if I have an emotion which says, I hate you, God didn't feel.
Te odio, Dios. Entonces siéntela.
Feel that. Go and feel that. I hate you, God.
Ve y siéntela.
Bash, bash, bash. Bang, bang.
Bang,
let it go.
Como haciéndolo del aporreado.
So that
entonces suéltala.
After that, you can have a sincere longing for.
De modo que después de eso puedes tener un anhelo sincero.
the love to enter you because you are here
que el amor entre.
to understand God's nature is good.
Porque de entrada eso, entiendes ahí en la cabeza, la naturaleza de Dios es buena.
You know, at least.
Al menos.
But a lot of people are telling themselves, like, they believe here God's nature is good.
Pero mucha gente se dice a sí misma, y bueno, creen que la naturaleza es buena de Dios.
Here they feel anger or hatred toward it.
Pero en el abajo, en el corazón, señalándose abajo, creen que, pues eso es, Dios es, o sea, tienen odio, etc.
They don't release the emotion because,
y no sueltan la emoción.
Because they feel it's a negative emotion that's bad.
Porque sienten que es una negativa, que es mala.
And they'll get punished for it. And
que serán castigados por ello.
God already knows, yeah. Yeah.
Le había dicho algo Igor y no sé muy bien lo que es. Y luego lo repetido es una cosa muy rápida. Bueno, voy a
They'll get
terminar.
punished for it and it's wrong. And God already knows, yeah. Yeah.
No sé, bueno, y eso, ya sigue.
So the reality is that we have this concept of God that is flawed so much. It's really deeply flawed. And as a result of the deep, and we can include this, as a result of the deep flaws that we have in our concept of God, which is about faith, a lack of faith in God, we have these deep flaws. So because we lack faith, we do not engage prayer. And prayer is the thing that opens our soul to the reception of love. Prayer is the longing towards God, the desire for God's love to enter my soul. When I lack faith in God, I don't have a longing for God. So I don't pray. I won't pray. I'll refuse to pray. And that's the problem, is that most of us are refusing to pray, and then we're going, I'm on the divine love path. How can you be on the divine love path when you're refusing to pray and you're not receiving divine love? You're on the natural love path. You're not on the divine love path. When you're on the divine love path, you want this relationship with God as your number one priority. That's why I said in the first century, very first commandment, you know, when I was asked what are the things that you would say to us as the most important things for our life? Love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, your whole strength. Have a concept of God, that God, as to why you would love God as well. Like, don't believe that God is wrath. Don't believe that God is punishing. Don't believe any of these things. They're all false. And every time you hold on to the belief of these things, you are not going to pray. You are not going to have a longing for God. You're better off, if you feel angry with God, go out and have a bash and yell and scream and swear at God. Get it out of your system. Get it out of your feelings, you know, so that you can go to God with a sincere feeling, I do want to receive love from you because I know that you're not the God that I imagined you to be. Yeah.
Would you say that any time we just really open ourselves to sincerely towards God, whatever feeling we encounter is going to be the block to why we're not even asking or praying.
Exactly. Yeah.
But a lot of us even have fear of doing that, don't we?
Yes.
We have fear of.
So emotional processing, if we can call it such a thing, is actually very simple. When I long for God's love to enter, there'll be a fear that comes up or some other false belief that comes up inside of my soul, and there's the emotion. Pretty easy. Feel that one, and you'll have some more of God's love enter you, take away some of these causes that are inside of you, and then those causes won't motivate future events as long as you live in harmony with the love that exists inside of you already, as long as you choose to act. Now, if you choose to act in fear, then of course you're not living in harmony with the love that's there already. So work through your fear. Let yourself feel your fear so that you don't honour your fear, you honour the love. You honour the love even though you're afraid. All right? That's what a person who receives divine love does. The person who doesn't receive divine love honours their fear every single time. Whether, you know, whatever love they have, they honour their fear every single time.
Voy a ver si puedo quitar un poco de ruido porque quizás se ve mucho.
Time. The person who receives divine love and is sincere in their relationship with God receives divine love, feels the love motivating them down a certain point, feels the fear get triggered, and then, of course, they go, okay, what's wrong here? Not the love, it's the fear. That's the thing I need to throw out here. So I let myself feel it. I experience it, throw it out the window by experiencing it. Allow yourself to experience the fear, allow yourself to shake and do whatever you need to experience the fear, so that, and hold on to the love. Hold on to the love that you've received. Base every decision that you make upon the love that you've received.
And even if we haven't yet received the love on the faith that you've just been discussing?
Yes. Base your decisions on the faith of the truth. Mm-hmm. God's not a punishing God. God is always loving. God is not a wrathful God. God is not wanting to hold all my mistakes against me. God wants to forgive me. Right? I just need to enter the state where that's possible. That's all I need to do. That's my will. That's the exercise of my will. That's me having faith in God's nature. Right? I need to have faith in God's true nature. I need to believe, or at least intellectually start accepting the truth about God. And whenever I notice an emotion in me that's completely opposite of that, I need to experience it. I need to get rid of it. I need to release it. If I release that emotion, now my longing will be strong. So if I'm angry with God, instead of suppressing it, go out and bash something and bash it and swear and scream at God and carry on for as long as it takes for you to get rid of that emotion. Don't sit on it. Don't try and hold it at bay because you're afraid that God will punish you further for expressing it. Don't do any of those things. Let go of the emotion so that you can come to God and feel like you want love from God. So you feel like you want it. And if you have an emotion that I'm not worthy, now you know that's not true. Here you might know it's not true. You're being told it's not true. It is not true. God feels that every one of her children are worthy to receive love, no matter whether they're in the deepest, darkest hells or in the pinnacle so far of reception of God's love. God knows that every one of them is deserving the same amount of receiving God's love. So if we know that, at least intellectually, we won't stop asking God for more love just because we feel bad about ourselves. We won't do that. And we won't ask God for more love because we feel bad about ourselves. We won't do that either.
Eso es un pájaro que se ha oído ahí fuera, de su casa. Yo creo que el estudio de grabación está en medio de... Se oyen pájaros a veces. Lo ponemos otra vez.
We won't ask God for more love because we feel bad about ourselves. We won't do that either. We'll ask God for more love because we have a strong desire to receive it. We want this relationship with God established. This is what it means to have faith in the truth. Truth about God. This is the kind of faith we need to develop. Now, obviously, as we receive more love and the causes of any truth about God, this is what it means to have faith in the truth about God. This is the kind of faith we need to develop. Now, obviously, as we receive more love and the cause...
Sería mejor en la verdad sobre Dios, en la verdad acerca de Dios.
Of any disharmonious things within us get released as a result of receiving the love dissolving those particular causes. Then, of course, we'll have more faith after the process begins. Yeah. But right at the beginning, we probably have none whatsoever. And that's something we must work on and establish. Learn about the truth. Learn of the truth about God. The truth about God is completely different to what the world's religions are teaching you. The truth about God is completely the opposite, in fact, of what the world's religions are teaching you. So that, I suppose, then brings us to the prayer, doesn't it? Do you have any more questions, maybe, about about the
No, I
faith?
was just going to say that Solomon even says in his message that love will come to you, and with it faith. So we exercise the faith, we pray, then the love comes, we get more faith.
And we get
then
more
becomes,
faith.
Yeah. Becomes an ongoing.
Because we're now having an experience with God that we feel. And then whenever you have an experience you can feel, your faith exponentially grows. So instead of it being now just a logical, intellectual concept of truth that we've based our faith upon, now we know it to be true because we've experienced something that tells us that it's true, as well as the logical concept. That logical concept is still existing, but now there's the addition of the experience, which of course will grow more faith. It's a natural result.
So it's the beginning of this process that it's like the first hurdle to get over, to really begin to develop this faith. Before we've received the love, then it grows and sort of fosters itself as it goes along.
Exactly. As we receive more love and we act in harmony with that love, our faith continues to grow, and obviously the causal emotions get removed, so it's easier to act in harmony with the faith. The more love that we've received from God, the easier it becomes to act in harmony with the love that we've received, not harder. You know, it's not like a struggle all the rest of my life, as the Christian religion will teach you. It's not like that at all. It becomes easier and easier and easier to act in harmony with the love because we have more love in our soul as a result.
And it's not an intellectual process, is it? You just naturally act in harmony with the love, so it's effortless even.
It's effortless and done without even thought. You don't even think about the decision you made because it's a natural decision. It's a decision because the nature of your soul has changed to become more loving. It's natural for the soul to make the more loving decision every single time. And if it's not natural for the soul to make a more loving decision, then you haven't actually changed. You've just imbibed an intellectual belief that has yet to touch your soul, that has yet to change you. And it's an indication that you're not receiving divine love as well. If you're having to struggle all the time to live in harmony with the love, then it means that you haven't received it. Because if you receive it, it is not a struggle to act in harmony with it. It's an automatic process to act in harmony with it. So for example, when I talk to people about telling the truth, if it's a struggle to tell the truth, then you've not received enough love yet to enter you into the second sphere of the spirit world from God. Because in the second sphere of the spirit world, you learn that it's not a struggle to tell the truth when you have enough love in your soul.
Este de Dios se refiere al amor de Dios, como para entrar en la segunda esfera.
Does that make sense? So that means if you're still struggling with telling the truth, not enough love has entered you yet to enter the second sphere. So go, okay, that's because of my lack of faith and desire, longing for it. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's not because I've made a mistake.
También he dicho falta de fe y deseo, y luego y falta de anhelo. Son casi sinónimos, ¿no?
It's not because of some badness that I did in the past. It's not because of any of those things.
It's not because, my parents and I'm a victim, or
it's not because of any of my parents' emotions even. It's not because of any of the emotions inside of me that I still need to release. It's because I have yet to receive enough love from God that would have changed all of these things in my soul. And once I acted in harmony with that love, I would have to speak the truth. I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't. And once I acted in harmony with that love, I would have to speak the truth. I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't try to get away with it. And every time I didn't speak the truth, I'd go, oh, that's terrible. I can't do that ever again. That's what will happen, because it will be a natural state of the soul to tell the truth. And then we won't be asking questions about, when should I tell the truth? Why should I tell the truth in that situation? We won't even ask any of those questions, because all the love in our soul dictates every answer automatically, we don't have to struggle, we don't have to question, we don't have to do any of those things. It's an automatic response that we're going to enter truth every single time. Mm-hmm. So I feel it's very important for people to understand this role of faith, and very important for people to understand that the love does the transformational work. So if we understand that love from God, the greatest thing in the universe that I've discovered, enters the soul, does the transformational work on the soul. And my job, if I have one, is to allow it in, to long for it to come in. And anything that's inside of me that stops me from longing for it to come in, I need to have some real focus on letting it go instead of holding on to it.
Because it's true, isn't it? As the love enters me, there's a disharmony between it and any unlovingness within me.
Yes.
And so that unlovingness is actually a resistance to love entering me.
It is.
So if as it enters me, I'm willing to just experience that unlovingness or the pain or whatever.
And go into a state of repentance for the unlovingness we've previously, taken.
Because it's sort of like the divine love is a flashlight on the side of the world. You can feel it suddenly.
A great big bright light on the problem.
Yeah. And if we're willing to feel that, then...
And we've got to be willing to feel, so that's the humility. We've got to be willing to feel.
Yeah. Then we've removed another resistance to receiving the love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the cause of what caused our sinful behaviour, God's love transforms. So it's not us that actually is transforming our soul anymore, as it is on the natural love path. On the divine love path, God's love is transforming our soul, and we're just willing and humble about going through the process with God.
Yeah.
We're willing to see when we're out of harmony with truth. We're humble about whenever we obviously have an untruth. We don't try to fight for it. We're willing to see it. We're willing to feel it inside of us, feel the unloving feelings that are inside of us as a result of that. We can feel that because they've just been exposed to us. And we go, wow, yeah, I do feel that. Wow. And we see it as a problem. Yeah. We see it as something that we need to address and be willing to release.
So it's sort of like the contrast between God's love and what's inside of us helps build the impetus or the knowledge of the error.
Exactly.
Whereas if we do it on our own on the natural love path, we're having to bumble our way along, use our intellect to analyse this. Is this unloving? Is this loving? Gee, it's hard to tell because I've got this emotion from my parents that said it was loving, but they're loving. It becomes. But whereas when God is like this big, massive spotlight torch onto this thing, and we can feel, wow, the contrast between this love and this thing inside of me.
It's so great.
It's so great.
And what am I going to choose to do?
No, aquí se refiere al amor. El contraste entre este. Aquí no sé lo que estaría pensando.
Yeah.
Now, this is where we need to use our will. Mm-hmm. Because what a lot of people do when they have the spotlight of God's love put on something in their soul, they fight for their soul retaining the error. Mm-hmm. And that is using your soul in complete disharmony with the love you've just received. If you were in harmony with the love you received, you'd see the error, notice the error, feel the error, and become repentant for the error. And in that process, then God's love can enter you about that error and make that error clean. Yeah. Right? Now, unless we engage that process, that error will remain in us unless we go through a process of natural love where we slowly try to work through the error and eventually release it. What I'm suggesting is you don't have to do that. If you're humble, you can see the error immediately when you've received divine love. any new error that's exposed, and you can ask for God to forgive that error too. You can ask for God's love to come and do its transformational work on that error and get rid of that error for you as well. And once that error is gone, all of those sins that you would have committed, all the things you would have done had you had that error retained within you, can no longer be performed. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, you're not going to cause further damage to yourself or other people because you've allowed God's love to do the transformation.
Okay, yeah. So this begins with faith.
So yeah, if we look at it all, the whole process begins with God's love, really. Mm-hmm. But in terms of ourselves, it begins with faith. We have to have at least some faith in God and God's goodness and God's love. Otherwise, we'll never ask for it. Yeah. So it begins with faith.
It begins with faith, and this other element, which leads us into prayer.
Exactly.
So should we talk about prayer now?
Bueno, pues hasta aquí. Hay muchas cosas muy interesantes para sentir, ¿verdad? Es una cosa...
Cuando él habló justo en ese espacio en el que Mary se fue, yo sentía que recibí la respuesta. Notaba ayer mi resistencia básicamente a creer, ¿no? Claro, y decía yo, más allá de todo, como dice él, de todo lo que hacemos, en el fondo terminamos eligiendo, sí, la fe en el error, lo que estuvimos viendo en esta semana también. Y que sí, era justo lo que dijo en ese momento, hablando solo, como reflexionando, que era lo que yo sentí que me faltaba, ¿no? Esa honestidad de procesar. Y como mi fachada era de la buena, tampoco me atrevo a pegar a algo o a blasfemar deliberadamente, pero que en realidad es como le dijo a Mary en un momento, o sea, la blasfemia ya está ahí, la estoy creyendo desde el momento que no me permito sentir que Dios me va a castigar o que corra un riesgo al expresarme honestamente. O sea, no, al contrario.
Tiene mucho que ver lo que está diciendo, creo, con esta parte de que eso de la blasfemia en realidad es la falsa humildad, ¿no? De que somos arrogantes cuando creemos, esto que ha dicho Mary ahí, creemos que no lo merecemos, no somos dignos de amor. Si se pudiera utilizar la palabra amables en el sentido de ser capaces de ser amados, pues es la capaces de amor, capaces de ser amados, dignos de amor, es. Y entonces ella aquí le está poniendo personal, por eso Meria tiene que procesar, ¿no? Porque están hablando de ellos. Y claro, tú has resonado ahí, porque claro, siempre lo llevan al terreno personal. Y es algo que ella misma ha sentido. El hecho de que creemos que Dios es amoroso, claro, pero si yo soy el problema, esto está diciendo una cosa mala de Dios, que Dios ha creado una cosa contraria a lo que dice el primer renglón de la oración del amor divino. Una criatura pecadora por esencia. Que es un concepto sobre Dios, claro. Que solo amas a los perfectos y todo eso. Es increíble, claro.
Claro, y cómo gobierna en el sentido de que, claro, el alma no o sea, refleja, en realidad está en armonía con la desarmonía, porque refleja, yo no lo puedo hacer, sí lo puedo ver, porque, bueno, ahí está un poco lo que decíamos antes de grabar, ya nos damos cuenta de, ya la fachada de alguna forma está pillada, en otro momento hubiera rezado igual, hubiera hecho como un acting, digamos, pero no, ya podía ver que no era real.
Sí, porque ya voy un momento al servicio, comentamos unos minutillos más, porque luego enseguida, dentro de unas horas, tienes que hacer cosas. Un momento.
Vale.
Buenas.
Estoy.
¿Cómo estamos? Aquí estamos con Claudia de la Argentina. ¿Cómo estamos? No, no soy,
Bien, te diría.
no
Perfecto,
soy
Iván.
buen locutor. Ahí
Ah,
tiene que atreverse más. Ana Pilar, que quiere ser locutora. Yo
Sí, sí.
hablo demasiado raro a veces. Bueno, entonces resulta que somos unos arrogantes cuando estamos ahí como Mary, estamos todos igual ahí. Ay, que no valgo, que no sé. Y en realidad es decir, Dios, claro, ahí dice, Dios sonríe ante nuestras debilidades. Hombre, ahí se carcajea a mandíbula tendida, ¿no?
Claro, yo percibo, Iván, en principio, un poco bueno con este proceso que él cuenta, que voy por mi cuenta en el camino del amor natural y algunas cosas sí ya he podido en este proceso de autodescubrimiento comprender que si tengo ira proyectada hacia los hombres y que me enseñaron que Dios es hombre, por lo tanto, de alguna forma también subyace, además de considerar ahora, como dice él, contemplar intelectualmente al menos, y fuimos viendo con vos en este proceso todos los principios, reconocer a Dios en la creación, en los principios inyectados en las leyes. Por lo tanto, yo esta construcción intelectual a la que invita a J, digamos, ya la inicié. Entonces, ¿qué hago? Como que otra vez la fachada, maquillo, si se quiere, ¿no? Entonces ya no es Dios el problema, entre comillas, pero como él mismo lo dice y lo dice en la oración del amor divino, en el comentario que hace de la oración del amor divino en el 2005, si no lloraste, o sea, si el reconocimiento de la emoción grabada, la verdad, basada en el error, digamos que es emocional, el error es emocional, si no lo lloraste, no llegaste a la profundidad, o sea, sí, vale, me doy cuenta de esto, lo veo así, pero quedó ahí. Y entonces, claro, yo siento que tengo doblemente. En este momento siento que no merezco porque me atrevo a decir que estoy, si me atrevo a decir que estoy enojada con Dios y que estoy muy ofendida, es como que ahí tengo la parte más enquistada, que lo pude ver ayer. Pero al mismo tiempo, esa ira o sea, es real, no es solo que, lo que te quería decir es, no es solo que yo me siento indigna, sino que niego, al seguir eligiendo la fachada, niego que realmente estoy enojada, porque
Sí,
ayer lo que yo trataba de hacer era rezar, como que está todo bien, como dice él en un momento, pero no, o sea, empezar por la verdad, enojate, salí o sea, sí, atravesala para poder hablar con Dios más allá de que vos digas, sí, pero yo ya sé, me acuerdo cuando él dice, y cuando mis hijos me responden, ya sé, le digo, no, no sabes. Lo aprendí con él porque no es lo que estás haciendo otra cosa, no lo sabes, porque el saber es emocional en realidad.
claro, pero ahí
Sí, ya,
para eso rezamos precisamente, para que
claro,
salgan esas emociones de resistencia a la verdad y a la fe. Pero fíjate que también ahí en ese momento nos alimenta, por así decirlo, el hecho de que estamos entrando en nuestra voluntad, reconociendo nuestro regalo. Nuestro libre albedrío está ejercido con una voluntad, una condición actual del alma que es una resistencia a la verdad sobre nosotros mismos y sobre Dios, que es el primer renglón de la oración del amor divino. Pero ahí es nuestra voluntad, es el alma. O sea, que eso ya, aunque es una verdad personal, ese error, estamos sensibilizándolos un poquito cada vez más, ¿no? de la fuerza de la voluntad y el deseo, ¿no? De lo importantes que son, como cosas que parecen de andar por casa muy simplonas, pero que son regalos en el alma, ¿no? Por eso la oración también habla de regalos, que son, empezando por esos, del libre albedrío, etc.
Claro, sí. Yo hoy, esta mañana, lo que me decía era básicamente eso, cuando ya atravesé, digamos, la experiencia de la resistencia ayer y sentí un poco la tristeza de encontrarme en ese lugar, y hoy renové la confianza. Bueno, fue un poco también importante esto del contexto, de salir de la casa, de estar en el patio, de encontrarme como acompañada por esa percepción de conexión. Entonces, fue distinta a la oración de la noche que fue ya dentro de mi cuarto, por ahí, aunque no parezca, estas experiencias se potencian por determinadas circunstancias, por descalzarte, y aunque son, no sé cómo explicarte, detalles, pero sí contribuyen a esa conexión mucho más amplia, profunda. Entonces, la de esta mañana, la oración, tenía otro contexto. También esto del despertar, ¿no? De estar un poco más despejado,
Sí.
no cansado.
Esto es lo que hemos propuesto ayer y creo que vas por ahí y que nos va a picar este tema, o sea, que nos va a gustar tratarlo cada vez más, que es cada vez con más detalle el tema de la diferencia entre prepararnos, porque hay que preparar el alma y tiene que ser un esfuerzo por nuestra parte, que no tiene nada que ver con el esfuerzo. Una vez que recibimos el amor de Dios y ha dicho que es natural, lo decides naturalmente. De hecho, yo ayer tuve un poco de resaca de eso, lo que recibí el domingo. De hecho, me constaté haciendo cosas que todos los días anteriores no había hecho con esa naturalidad, aunque esté yo solo y todo esto que es bastante miserable ahora mismo como vivo de alguna manera. Pero, o sea, no por pobreza ni por nada de eso, sino la cualidad álmica, digamos. Pero es increíble. O sea, entonces, la diferencia esa, porque en la nueva era venimos de un sitio muy anestesiado donde no es está tomada la verdad esa, la verdad que es, ya ves, porque es una mezcla de verdades con falsedades a grandes rasgos en casi todo, ¿no? Bueno, en todo lo que hay en la nueva era, porque es verdad. Sí. Lo de que no hay que hacer esfuerzo cuando recibes, pero está todo trucado por espíritus y la gente terminamos diciendo cosas mezcladas de cuando nos tocan un poquito una herida, no, pero nos viene la verdad X de la frase tal o no sé cuántos, con el sentimiento que nos metió aquel espíritu hace 3 meses y lo recordamos y decimos, no, pero no, ya está, no esfuerzo. No, o sea, no, el esfuerzo es esa preparación del alma que, por ejemplo, vimos el taller de ética y moral. Más ética y más moral, como nos ha dicho ya también aquí ayer, yo creo que lo trato. ¿O lo vamos a ver? No, lo vamos a ver. O sea, en una preparación. O sea, tú por muy bueno que seas, por realmente que una persona que, pues eso, realmente no ha manchado mucho el alma, no recibe amor divino si no lo pide. Entonces, ese es el tema. Aunque esa persona pues puede estar más afianzada, no, puede estar más confiada en decir, bueno, no, el creador de estas leyes es amoroso, mira qué bien me va, por así, lo siente más agradecimiento X, lo que sea, pero esa persona está en camino al amor natural. si no recibe amor divino, es decir, si no lo pide, Dios no se lo va a dar. Entonces, son cosas súper claras esto en torno a esto, irlo dilucidando y muy prácticamente, ¿no? Con qué significa preparar el alma. De hecho, acuérdate, y esa la tenemos que hacer aún con quizá la traducción y el vídeo, las primeras charlas de Mary en el 2014, que la hice en audio raramente así, es desarrollar la voluntad de amar, ¿no? Y ella hablaba del músculo de la voluntad, no sé qué. Y claro, están hablando de eso, pero desarrollar la voluntad de amar no es recibir amor divino. Y eso, y lo veremos. Entonces, todo este tema de preparar el alma, porque los espíritus más infernales, digamos, la gente que está más oscura, no es menos a la hora de recibir amor divino. O sea, vale que a lo mejor cuesta más llegar a ellos, pero no tienen una dificultad mayor que la de la falta de deseo que todos tenemos más o menos sincero de pedirlo, pero vamos.
Claro, sí, totalmente. E incluso la misma circunstancia quizás, con la diferencia que yo estoy en este plano, que todavía tengo el cuerpo físico, pero en, en mi caso que podemos compartir heridas, quiero decir, y sentir la misma ira hacia Dios o hacia los hombres y el mismo camino, el mismo procedimiento, sí, totalmente. No hay ninguna diferencia. Así es.
Ujú.
Yo sí percibo que en las condiciones externas que en otro momento se quedaban como, o sea, como dentro de un ritual, como estandarizadas, eso quería decir. También, bueno, con lo que hablabas un poco vos, o esto de sentir que ya me pasó también al tratar de intervenir desde otro lugar, tener una percepción de calma, pero que tiene que ver con los espíritus que te vienen a ofrecer, o sea, como pasa en el proceso de la adicción, ¿no? De sentir que te falta algo y te ofrecen esa respuesta y uno queda como que ya pasó y ya está. Yo siento que en realidad el compromiso, que es lo que yo estaba, como dijo Mary, saltándome la fe, en realidad, subestimando un poco, decía ayer, después de la hora de salir así con esa inyección, hoy no sabía de qué íbamos a hablar, o sea, sí sabía que era la fe, pero no conocía el desarrollo. Pero sí, termino celebrando un poco en haberme dado cuenta, como dijo él, que me salté un paso. ¿eh? Sí, sí, porque lo pude ver y me quedé sí reconociendo el bloqueo, no lo viví todavía, no me lo permití, ya voy a seguir pidiendo.
Yo creo que todo el mundo, cuando empezamos, ¿no? Nos saltamos,
Sí,
estamos en esa fase. Ahora mismo muchos, sí. De mi
sí,
grupo, nosotros un poco. Minusvalorando el poder de la voluntad por todos los lados, ¿no?
claro, claro, buscando de nuevo ese atajo, sí, sí, sí,
Sí, es muy
de alguna
gracioso.
manera.
Bueno, es tragicómico, ¿no? Como uno se pone ahí a hacer cosas, arrastramos cosas de hace años y que son cosas que están afianzando la creencia de que no somos, o sea, no, de que Dios no ama a los que no se preparan, ¿no? Que no se ponen en calma o no se ponen, yo qué sé, o sea, que hacer esas cosas puede venir bien si las hacemos desde un estado, a lo mejor que solo es cuando realmente estamos muy agotados en un estado infantil, hemos salido por ahí, una caminata, nos sentamos un momento y de repente nos sale una espontaneidad de un deseo más infantil, espontáneo, lo que sea. O sea, que nos vienen bien a lo mejor esas cosas, pero que esas cosas normalmente han sido usadas para reforzar esas creencias, ¿no? Dios solo ama si me hago esto, lo otro, si estoy, o mira qué mal estoy, y entonces voy a hacer algo yo por mi cuenta y me siento aquí. Y por eso el yoga y las meditaciones de los retiros salvajes de muchos días en silencio, por eso los usan tan fácilmente los espíritus, porque la voluntad puede estar en dos cosas completamente opuestas y en todos los rangos intermedios entre la espontaneidad infantil y lo otro.
Claro, claro, totalmente. Más nuestra necesidad bueno, es la voluntad, sí, nuestra necesidad de buscar ese camino alternativo. Sí, siento que justamente el diseño de la nueva era responde a esa inmediatez, porque encima no tenemos tiempo. Una de las cosas que hoy me hicieron notar y en ese momento salí, estaba en mi habitación frente a la computadora trabajando mi tarea, digamos, laboral específica. Y en ese momento me di cuenta de la desamorosidad, digamos, de ese inicio de la mañana, así como recortado, como si fuera en paralelo la vida, ¿no? Y Dios, o sea, ahora Dios por allá y bueno, ahora trabajo. Y ahí fue que corté y me fui al patio para encontrarme básicamente y conectar, y a pesar de que después sí volví a trabajar, pero ya fue desde otro lugar, sí, porque no, es como que no acompañan el diseño que hicimos de la vida, el sistema de creencias no acompaña en el sentido de lo que hace Mary de cortar un video, de retirarse a sentir, o sea, todas esas desprolijidades, entre comillas, y tan amorosas, no nos las permitimos. Estoy apurada, no tengo tiempo. Es muy triste, sí, en ese sentido, ¿no?
Sí,
Así que
y sucede aunque no tengamos realmente excusa, o sea, nos buscamos cualquier cosa.
claro.
O sea, aunque no tuvieras ahora nada de ocupaciones ni nada de eso.
Sí. Bueno, eso lo viví con mis hijos ahora, sí. Estoy esperando el momento, me dijo mi hijo. Sí, ¿por qué no llorás? Le dije. Estoy esperando el momento. Sí, tal cual. Es lo que acabas de decir. No importa, sí.
Bueno,
Así
pues
que sí, bien. Gracias, Iván.
podemos, si te parece, leemos para recordar que venimos de aquí, de que están viendo lo del el mensaje que breve era. Lo leo y
Dale, me
¿no?
gustaría.
Este Salomón del Antiguo Testamento, que por cierto se sabe, creo que solo básicamente por lo de la Biblia. Lo mira un poco cutremente, ¿no? Pues el artículo de la Wikipedia, que no sé qué tal será en español, pero y es un señor que terminó degenerando mucho ahí con un harén muy grande de mujeres, no sé qué, que luego se arrepintió y dicen que él es el que escribió el libro del Eclesiastés, de sabiduría de la Biblia. Y como diciendo eso, la frase esa de vanidades y ese tipo de cosas. Contra el mundo, como que él debe haber tenido que procesar bastante porque era un rey así como que al principio debió ser bastante serio, un poco pacífico y diplomático.
Yo lo recuerdo, por lo único que recuerdo a Salomón era por su sabiduría. Y recuerdo la circunstancia de las madres que se disputaban un hijo, que era así muy práctico y contundente en intervenir en determinados conflictos, y la intervención era breve y radical, así. Y de eso tengo el recuerdo de él.
Pero fíjate que
Ese,
son personajes con unas vidas completamente extremas, o sea, porque si miráramos toda la figura completa, lo tendríamos también como una especie de Hitler, seguramente. Pero fíjate,
claro,
qué bonito también que la historia a veces, con algunos personajes, no sé si solamente de esta tradición o de cuáles, les deja solo lo agradable, ¿no? Quizás es un reflejo de que este señor ya es un espíritu celestial.
claro, sí.
Y entonces aquí postulábamos, que no sé si será verdad, ¿no?, que Salomón se presentaba a Payet sintiendo que en realidad no podía comunicarle mucho porque él ya está un poco cansado de tanta variedad de gente que se le presentaba y de repente yo creo que no lo esperaba, ¿no? No espera, cada una de las veces hay personajes muy raros, no solo conocidos. Es que sí, constructores de las pirámides y no le pueden decir nada, porque es que Payet pues tampoco es que le interese, yo creo. Y entonces aquí le dice, bueno, llega para decirle que no le va a decir nada, que muy pronto le va a escribir otro mensaje con alguna gran verdad del Padre. No escribe más por ahora, pero pronto vendré. Y Payet se atreve y le dice, claro, ya que es Salomón, ¿qué es lo más grande de todo el mundo? Ya debería tener esa fama de sabiduría, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo más grande? Respuesta: la oración y la fe por parte de los mortales y el amor divino por parte de Dios. Este último está a la espera, y las primeras hacen que entre en el alma de los hombres, el amor. No hay ninguna otra verdad grande y tan trascendental para la humanidad. Permite que lo que digo se hunda profundamente en tu memoria y prueba el experimento. Sé que lo intentas, pero inténtalo y luego inténtalo y no dejes de intentarlo. El amor vendrá a ti y con él la fe y luego el conocimiento y luego la propiedad de ello. Podría escribir durante mucho tiempo, pero no debo hacerlo ya que estás cansado. Así que con mi amor y mis bendiciones te daré las buenas noches y que el amor del Padre tome posesión de ti. Tu hermano en Cristo, Salomón. Bueno, pues muchas gracias, Claudia, y así te dejamos en manos y dejamos a nuestro amado público, despídete de ellos, en manos de Salomón.
Muchas gracias, sí. Gracias, Iván. Gracias a todos los que nos acompañan también.